Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Usually I say good evening, but because this is a lunch and learn, it's a different scenario altogether. Here we are in August. For those on the southeast, we just survived yet another hurricane, which ended up being just a ton of rain. So I hope you guys are all well. And for those on the West Coast, I hope that the summer's going really well. It's going by really quickly. It's already August, and we're getting into some really exciting topics. Speaking of exciting topics, the fact that the gut-brain axis is the immediate connection for most people, but when I say the gut-liver axis, most people kind of make a weird face because they've never thought about that before. In some ways is astounding because I believe one of the big drivers of chronic degenerative disease, besides the associated gut issues, oxidative stress, immune activation, inflammatory problems as a result of all those things, has to do with excessive accumulation of toxicity in the body. And if you have ever studied the topic of homotoxicology, which is essentially translated as the study of how humans accumulate toxic material and get sick, it's an incredible philosophy to look at as a lens of understanding why a multitude of different chronic conditions likely all arise from a similar fundamental framework or process, to which the gut and the liver are central to those processes, both in the development of them, but also in the reversal of them. So on that little teaser and the cliffhanger, let's get into introducing the first part of today's talk. Let's talk about the workhorse of the human body. This poor guy that during the summer, or girl, during the summer probably gets more abuse at the cottage, at the water on the weekends, at the beach, what have you. What I'm getting at is the summertime typically is when we indulge more as human beings. We have the concept of summer and winter for our physiology. And when summer is present in nature, we have abundance. We have crops that grow. We have the ability to indulge in certain activities and behaviors that accompany longer light cycles that typically involve the consumption of more calories, possibly foods that are not so good for us, the consumption of alcohol. When you understand how many different biochemical processes the liver actually regulates and how it is centrally tied to how these potential negative behaviors that our clients might be engaging in, albeit not chronically, but often enough for their health status, can be something that is holding them back only because the message they're giving to their body is something that is overwhelming the liver's ability to keep, as this little statement here, keep the internal environment clean. And it does so thanklessly unless we abuse it, then it starts to tell us something's going wrong. To understand the liver is very important because when we think liver, almost everyone automatically thinks detox. And it is, again, the primary organ of detoxification in the body. But look where it's located in proximity to the other organs of the human body. It is what I call a non-digestive digestive organ, because directly above where most of the digestion takes place, directly lateral to where the initiation of digestion, specifically protein digestion, takes place, you have the liver on one side and you have another lesser known digestive organ called the spleen on the other side. Both of them very much interconnect to the activity of the gallbladder and the pancreas. When we think bile production, we think gallbladder, but the gallbladder is actually the house of concentration of bile. The production of bile, which takes place in the liver, is dependent upon metabolic health within that organ in order to make enough bile, which A, has a role in digestion, specifically the digestion of fats, the absorption of fats and fat-soluble vitamins. But additionally, bile has the important requirement as acting as some sort of solvent for the small intestine, making sure that things like SIBO and fungal overgrowths don't take place. But bile doesn't only act as a digestive aid, it is something that also plays a large role in the microbiome's metabolic activity and population dynamics in the colon, because secondary bile acids are ways that the body regulates the microbiome and potentially the overgrowth of certain species of bacteria, but also the metabolic activity of how those bacteria are communicating with us, the hosts, to make that symbiotic relationship of us, the host, and the 3 to 5 pounds of microbes that live in our digestive system as happy a relationship as possible. So we have to understand that the liver has two main roles within the body and two things that I'm going to focus on and highlight in today's talk. As a metabolic organ, it's very, very important in regulation and the conversion of the nutrients that we take in our bodies, or our diet specifically, that our body requires in terms of making sure there's adequate energy and adequate metabolic cofactors for all the biochemical reactions to take place. And the liver is a storehouse for a lot of these things, specifically certain macronutrients, the regulation of lipids and cholesterol, and the storage of fat-soluble vitamins all takes place in the liver. So when you tell your clients to be careful with their vitamin A supplementation, the reason that is because liver toxicity in terms of high dose of vitamin A can be something that is generated by excessive supplementation of that vitamin. Second thing the liver does, and as a metabolic but also a detox organ, is it takes up all the toxic substances within the body that, yes, come from outside the environment we live in, but we have to understand that because we have such a complex metabolism in our bodies, simply by making energy from the food we eat, we generate endotoxins, metabolic byproducts. We generate free radicals. Being active and exercising, we generate metabolic acids. And because of what lives in our digestive systems, if we don't have a healthy gut, we can overburden our circulatory systems with things like endotoxins and partially digested food compounds. So when you look at the structure of the liver, notice how vascularized it is. It also has an incredibly detailed and complex biliary duct capacity. And the liver also circulates and filters all the blood from the digestive organs before it goes back into the venous circulation to get reoxygenated by the lungs and the heart. So the internal environment of our gut is directly dependent upon how much work our liver has to do and how much potential toxic burden we're contributing to systemic circulation based upon how well our liver is functioning. So when it comes to optimal digestion, when it comes to optimal gut health, without strong metabolic liver function, which is a very metabolically demanding organ, the liver, likely next to the brain, has the most mitochondrial density per cell, which means a large portion of the daily energy our body requires is coming from the liver in order to continuously filter the blood every few minutes it circulates through it. But in addition to that, if we don't digest food well, we might be compromising overall liver function because the food and the calories in the food that we eat are critical for making sure that our liver is getting adequately nourished to perform all of its work, thanklessly. So the liver as a metabolic organ, this is central to know and learn if you are dealing with people who have issues with metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, but also things like stubborn weight loss, poor energy levels, high levels of inflammatory burden, people who want to exercise at high levels. The liver is the seat of metabolic regulation. What I mean by the seat of metabolic regulation is it is the organ that determines how the nutrition that we intake through the digestive system is distributed, stored, and regulated in our bodies at the mercy of the hormones. So things like insulin, glucagon, various signals that come from the endocrine system are directing the liver in terms of how to make sure that energy supply and energy utilization around our body is adequately regulated. So the glucose from the carbohydrates we eat, the amino acids from the proteins we eat, and the fats from the fat we eat, after digestion are all sent to the liver to have them essentially centrally regulated and metering how much is being sent out and how much is being stored. As I said before, the main repository for vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D, and vitamin K typically are stored in the liver, whereas the water-soluble vitamins, the C's and the B's, are not. And the liver also regulates the body's amino acid pool, i.e. the buildup and the breakdown and release of amino acids to the body, and also blood glucose regulation because the liver stores liver glycogen, which is a stored form of carbohydrate that gets broken down when our blood sugar starts to dip, so our brains are never out of energy. Again, a thankless job that this organ performs. So if any of your clients, when you run a blood panel or an organic acids test, some sort of functional lab test, have issues with lipids, with cholesterol, with insulin, with fasting glucose, the HOMA-IR regulation, or potentially some aspects of protein dysregulation, which is more kidney related, they are liver and potentially detox correlated issues. Because as I said, all lipid metabolism, all cholesterol synthesis, LDL, HDL, things of that nature, liver regulated. Carbohydrate metabolism, fasting glucose, fed glucose, and the amount of insulin that our pancreas needs to release in order for the liver to be adequately regulating glucose, there's a very important communication there. So when it comes to understanding metabolism, very few people correlate detoxification with metabolism, and it's a very easy connection to make. If our bodies are excessively toxic, the toxic burden is increased, our liver metabolically has to do more work to help alleviate the detoxification burden. If the liver is compromised and in and of itself dealing with a lot of oxidative stress, its ability to regulate healthy metabolic functions within the body becomes compromised. And that's why we see things that are part and parcel, not only dysregulation of hormones and the various things I mentioned when it comes to lipid metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism, but the development of things like non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome, excessive accumulation of body fat, and the inability to lose weight accompanied with low energy levels. I always think that there's a liver problem going on there that needs to be addressed while we actually help purge the liver of its toxic burden. So this is just a quick rundown of the metabolic things that I think is so important to know, because from a fundamental perspective of health, my view is energy is everything. So if the liver controls essentially all energy metabolism through hormone signaling, we have to understand the relationships there. When we eat food, our body has an abundance of amino acids and carbohydrates and fats. And as a result of that, we release this thing called insulin, which tells the body, all right, let's drive nutrients into storage. And as a result of that, the liver will start to build glycogen stores in the liver and the muscles. It will start to accumulate amino acids, and it will tell the body there's adequate amounts of energy here to make sure that you can go and use that energy to burn it off. During a fasted state, when we refrain from eating, the opposite happens, and the liver is actually the central storehouse of making sure that we can break down stored energy. So this way we don't collapse when we don't eat food. The body regulates energy from storage to put it into the bloodstream. And this is a very normal process that is essential for healthy metabolic function and to not accumulate excessive amounts of body fat from the inability to break down fuel. And when we do break down fuel, the liver is central in regulating that as well, because we want to make sure that we can donate the specific things like amino acids that are required for liver detoxification and make sure those processes are adequately running all the time in order to make sure our body stays healthy metabolically. So there'll be a small test on this graphic after the fact, but I included this just because I'm so interested in the metabolic process, and we don't really think about liver and metabolism. We think about liver and detox, as I've said before. But if you can understand these relationships, and when it comes to dealing with client care, clients are told that if your cholesterol is high, it's dangerous. You have to take a drug. If your glucose levels are high, your insulin levels are high, you have a metabolic problem. Cleaning out the liver and supporting the digestive system are, in my opinion, the first steps in terms of addressing these kinds of things. Because if we know that this organ is central to the regulation of metabolism, then it's the first thing that we should intervene with clinically in order to help that client get to a better baseline. The second thing that's really important, which dovetails into the second aspect of what I want to focus on today with liver health, is the fact that all the blood that comes from the digestive organs, not only the liver itself, but the spleen, the stomach, the pancreas, the small intestine, and the colon, all of that blood is filtered to the liver before it goes back into venous circulation, i.e. systemic circulation. So the issue becomes, and it's a question to ask, and you can start thinking about this now to see if your thought process is aligned with mine. What do the contents of the blood in the gut contain? Why might that be problematic, not only for the quality of the blood and the viscosity of the health of our blood, but what that may cause in terms of liver burden that then has to be addressed in order for us not to start to accumulate toxins and compromise our health. So now we got to look at the liver as an organ of detoxification. The liver is the body's primary filter, and the liver works in conjunction with the kidneys and also the other organs of detoxification to cleanse the blood and theoretically cleanse the lip. I did mention before that the liver is incredibly mitochondrial dense because it's a very highly metabolically active organ. And the reason for that is because the process of liver detoxification is quite complicated and quite innately designed. We have these enzymes that are called the cytochrome P450 enzymes that essentially are the induction of the liver detoxification process. And their focus is to figure out how to properly and safely detoxify things that are called endotoxins, which are toxins that come from in the body, various aspects of metabolic processes, things like endotoxins from the gut, lipopolysaccharides, undigested food molecules, acids, and exotoxins, which are things that come in from our environments. If you live in a city center, breathing in exhaust fumes, things like volatile organic compounds, pesticides, chemical residues, all of those things, if allowed to freely circulate in the body, either cause metabolic stress when they interact with various cellular processes and metabolic processes, or the second thing is they cause potential issues because the body, which cannot detoxify, has to start storing those toxins, which is a really interesting process to look at. The process of liver detox starts with what's called phase 1 detoxification of these P450 enzyme systems. This is where a toxic molecule is brought to the liver and it is acted upon and primed for phase 1 detoxification, which in some cases, if it's a simple molecule, it's detoxified directly there. Whereas if it's a more complicated molecule, which is a fat-soluble compound, the body cannot directly release fat-soluble molecules unless they are converted into a water-soluble intermediate. And this is where the phase 2 detoxification systems take over, which is one of 6 different pathways that the liver will conjugate something, typically an amino acid, some sort of antioxidant system, some sort of micronutrient, and that chemically modified molecule will then get sent to an excretion pathway, typically the stool or the kidneys, the urinary system, before it is finally being removed from the body. These processes are happening every second of the day. So as you're all sitting here right now, you're all detoxifying. And hopefully you've kept your toxic burden low and you're in an optimal environment so that your detoxification systems are running more efficiently than the chemically toxic burden coming in. But they're also potentially harmful for the body because the process of detoxification itself generates free radicals. And essentially, anytime you hear free radical, you can correlate that with the term oxidative stress. So simply by getting rid of the toxins that our body accumulates, we run the risk of causing an increase in oxidative damage, which can cause metabolic issues if we don't have an adequate antioxidant system or an adequate amount of antioxidant micronutrients. That was a lot of information, so pictures sometimes say 1,000 words. This is the 3 phases of detoxification that I just described, kind of in a stepped manner. On the left-hand side, you have the activation phase with that little bar in the center. That's what I just described, the generation of a reactive oxygen intermediate, which needs an antioxidant from storage to neutralize. Then you have your conjugation pathway, which is the start of the phase 2 detoxification enzymes. And then you have the transport. We'll get into this a little bit more later on, but it's very important to almost think working backwards when you're wanting to run this process clinically. What I mean working backwards is you don't start by focusing on the activation aspect. You start making sure that the transport systems in the body, the bile, the intestines, so the gut health, the kidneys, the urinary health, the skin, and what I'll add here is the breath. If those, what are called channels of detoxification, are working well, and the client is metabolically healthy and has adequate energy level, it's likely okay to do something like a targeted detox. If the client does not have those processes running well and you want to start upregulating detoxification in the human body, you might cause a little bit of an auto-intoxication, Herxheimer's reaction to where your client might feel absolutely terrible because if you start trying to push liver detox and they don't have the energy to do so, but they're having a bowel movement once every 4 days, that's a problem. And the art of detoxification is a little bit more complex even simply than this. So let's dive into it. You need to make sure that all the cofactors are there. And these are the vitamins, the minerals, and the antioxidants that come from the food we eat and also the supplements that we take. And when it comes to detox, it's not only a liver-specific consideration. And why we're talking about sulfurazyme today is sulfurazyme and borochophane in and of itself is a very unique compound when it comes to driving the detoxification process because of where its bioactive components or compounds have an effect within the body. So in the 6 phases of detoxification, sulforaphane in and of itself can help induce one of the phase 2 detox pathways, which in some cases can get bottlenecked or potentially backlogged if the person has a nutritional deficiency or some degree of liver stress. The other thing we have to talk about is when you're opening the channels of detoxification, you might want to focus on the liver because that's where everything ultimately gets detoxified, in addition to the kidneys before it's removed. But you have to think that detoxification has to happen at the cellular level. I'm going to do my best to explain this very simplistically. I've talked about the model that goes from cells to tissues, tissues to organs, organs to the organism. That's how we human beings are made. So when we're talking about detoxification, the human body doesn't simply store toxins in the liver or in the kidneys. The human body stores toxins anywhere it needs to if there is an increased amount of toxins that need to be stored away that are unable to be detoxified. Generally speaking, a healthy person who has the ability to will push toxins out of their circulatory systems, i.e. the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system, just as quickly as they're coming in. But when the toxic burden starts to overwhelm them, the body has to have some sort of storage depot in which there are 2 main areas within the human body. The first is the adipose tissue cells, also known as fat cells. When someone is increasing their adipose accumulation, which is a technical way of saying increasing their quantity of body fat, one reason that happens so easily and so quickly for someone is it's the body's protective mechanism to stop the toxic material from chronically circulating in the body and getting access to the cells of different organs. The second aspect of where the body stores toxins is in the connective tissue, or what's called the ground matrix of the human body. And this is the last line of storage defense before the toxins start to directly enter the cells, and that's where they cause metabolic disruption and damage. So the first layer of thinking that I introduced was if you're going to start detoxifying, you want to think about the channels of elimination before you start thinking about upregulating detoxification in the liver. The second aspect is if you cannot adequately support cellular detoxification and making sure that the body's ability to remove things from stored tissues via fat loss or stimulation of the removal of things via lymphatic flow and circulatory flow, it's not complete detoxification. And this is why it matters so much. If we are starting to store toxic materials inside of cells, we're essentially moving towards the downward facing red arrow, the progressive vicoration of cellular degeneration. And when toxic material gets into the intracellular environment, that's when we see genetic, or I should say epigenetic changes in how that cell behaves that alter the expression of certain genes, the ability of the body and the cells to make energy, and the inability of those cells to properly detoxify. And I believe in the long run, the degeneration leads to the ultimate manifestations of the diseases we see that essentially compromise life. If we're able to go deep into the cell and start to properly and adequately detoxify that cell, it happens in the reverse order of how it's generated. We start to pull the toxic materials out of cells, which then we start to pull them back into the connective tissue. Then from the connective tissue, we pull them into the circulatory systems. Then those toxins are sent to the liver, to the kidneys, to be properly chemically modified before they are excreted via the bowel, the urinary system, the skin, and the breath. And for those who want to study this a little bit more intensely, this is a book I suggest everyone who wants to get deeper into this topic reads, because this is essentially the framework or the philosophy for how homotoxicology believes the body gets sick. we start storing things into the connective tissue. And when we start to deposit them in the cells, that's an issue. And why it's such an important thing to remember, and I've said this of every digestive cell, but this actually is every cell in the body. Every area is monitored by a blood vessel, a lymphatic vessel, and a nerve vessel. And that's why you can use diagnostics to get an overall sense of just how these areas and tissues are working in order to make sure that the process of how the body is storing and releasing toxins is balanced towards the detoxification side, which typically helps the body alleviate the chronic symptoms that come from degenerative chronic conditions and helps the body move back towards optimal health, free of stress. And for those who want to dive deeper into the 6 phases of detoxification, I'll leave this up here, which I won't go into today because I'd rather talk about sulfurazyme and where it plays a key role in this process into detoxification, in addition to some other processes and things that I think we should consider when helping a client in this way. So the gut-liver axis is the connection point to where a lot of these processes can initiate. And we know that sometimes eating can be the most toxic thing we do to our guts because of not only what we're eating, but how well we're digesting. So we've talked about how the liver has a very central role in metabolism, a very central role in detoxification. But again, the liver is still subject to the influence of what I think is arguably the most important body system that affects all systems in the gut microbiome and what happens at the intestinal epithelial barrier. Because what goes on in the gut microbes has a bidirectional communication with how the body regulates liver function. So the liver shapes intestinal microbial communities, as I said before, via the production of bile and the antimicrobial peptides generated in the liver, which can influence the generation of dysbiosis or the maintenance of a healthy gut microbiome. The second thing is the health of the intestinal barrier. And we keep saying this every month because it's so important to reiterate. The intestinal mucosal, the last layer of digestion, and the vascular barriers, we have to remember there's one single cell layer thick of cells at the small intestinal layer, and directly underneath that is systemic circulation. So if our gut is toxic, we have an overgrowth of certain strains of bacteria, we have an increased abundance of pro-inflammatory metabolites, we have undigested food molecules, we have bacterial death and endotoxins entering into our bloodstream, getting below the intestinal barrier, then the blood from the gut doesn't get filtered through the liver because leaky gut causes those contents to translate directly into the circulatory system. They don't get that first pass of liver detoxification, and that's why leaky gut immediately generates an inflammatory response that leads to the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines over the long term. So this graphic is wonderful because it shows the bidirectional communication. If the gut is leaky, if there is an increased quantity of contents not only in the blood that goes to the liver from the gut, but things that are getting circulated outside, those immune processes are going to influence the overall liver health and its metabolic processes. And what a healthy gut-liver axis relationship looks like is actually quite intricate. Because it is an organ of digestion, technically, the liver produces and concentrates the bile in the gallbladder to aid in lipid digestion. So those who don't have a gallbladder, typically speaking, struggle dramatically when they try to eat something like an avocado or a high-fat food, because if you can't concentrate the bile to break and emulsify that fat down, it's going to run out of you really quickly. So in a healthy state with adequate liver and gallbladder function, when we digest food, the gut nourishes the body because we can properly break down and absorb all the nutrition from the food we eat. And then therefore, the liver can not only get the adequate energy it needs from the macronutrients that we break down and absorb, but it can store the fat-soluble nutrients for all the metabolic cofactors that we need for vitamin A, E, D, and K utilization. Beyond digestion, the bile produced by the liver, as I mentioned before, acts as a method of maintenance within the small intestine. So the correlation between gallbladderectomies and SIBO are quite high. And if we have adequate bile production, it's like scrubbing the internal environment of our small intestine because the vast majority of bacteria should not be in the small intestine of the microbiome. It should be within the colon, which is where the secondary bile acids, which are chemically modified by the microbes themselves, are formed to help keep checks and balances within the microbiome, i.e., preventing the overgrowth of potentially pathogenic bacteria while promoting good diversity and balances of different strains and different families of bacteria, so our microbiome moves as one cohesive unit that has good communication. If the gut is working well, we have a good integrity of seal within our digestive system, then the liver will filter the blood that is transported to it via the hepatic portal vein before it's returned to venous circulation, and everything works well. This is a healthy gut-liver axis relationship. What happens if it's compromised? Well, then the liver congestion, gallbladder dysfunction, restriction of bile flow, not only do we compromise the digestive process, but we predispose our internal environments, us who have this, to the overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, to the inability to regulate potential populations of bacterial in the colon, and therefore the blood in and of itself gets more polluted, which places a lot of stress on liver cells. And the liver has these specialized immune cells that, when overburdened, they start to generate pro-inflammatory cytokines as a signal to the immune system that something problematic is here. So add that to a leaky gut phenomenon, which will increase toxic burden because there's a chronic seepage of stuff directly into our circulatory systems. That generates the long-term toxicity, the immune activation that comes with that, which always downregulates available energy production. It's a very important relationship. High amounts of oxidative stress and immune activity reduces available energy left over for health processes. So this is where we see this metabolic dysregulation, the chronic toxicity, and the generation of things like non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome and cirrhosis as a liver-specific problem. But as a more systemic problem, we start to bioaccumulate toxic materials and metabolites, and as a result of that, the body becomes ever more compromised. So what's happening in the liver and in the gut, if problematic, is what's generating these things that get sent into systemic circulation and dysfunction. And I do believe that if someone has chronically high cholesterol, chronically high LDL, and chronically low HDL, it is not a cholesterol problem. It is a metabolic problem, because the liver is what breaks down the cholesterol that's being collected. And if the HDL quantity is low, it's not that the body is eating too much cholesterol, it's the liver lacks the energy to adequately break down and remove cholesterol via the bowel, because cholesterol, like any other material that gets removed from the body, needs to be chemically modified in the liver before it goes. And we can talk about that after the fact if anyone has specific questions regarding that. So the long-term issues under these chronic conditions create this feedback loop. Long-term gut issues create liver stress. Long-term liver stress creates gut issues. And unless we break the cycle, unfortunately, one's physiology is likely stuck in this, and it gets ever perpetually worse unless we throw a wrench in the plans. Because on the left-hand side, you have a healthy connection. You have adequate bile production in the liver. You have an adequate ability to regulate the internal environment at the gut level. But as we start to move towards a pathogenic state, you have local gut issues, bacterial translocation, which then places stress on the liver, congests the hepatic portal vein, and causes liver dysfunction and inflammatory processes to be generated directly in the liver, which, as I said, because it's an organ of central metabolic regulation, will cause metabolic issues system-wide. And an important perspective, we're talking a lot about looking at the liver kind of in a silo here and in isolation. But if you don't take care of the other things that we always talk about, if the digestion is not supported, and if someone is not adequately digesting their fats or their proteins, that's going to cause stress. If the gut health and the microbiome is potentially dysbiotic, or there has been a long-standing issue, then we know how they connect to leaky gut and systemic stress. So I believe in focusing on detoxification, it is essential to make sure that you're supporting all systemic body processes, as well as specific processes that help nourish the body via the use of digestive enzymes, probiotics, potentially systemic enzymes in conjunction with whatever you're using for liver support, and using micronutrients that take the burden off of the digestive system. Something like proteinzyme would be a wonderful addition to any sort of liver or detox support because you're taking a lot of the energetic burden off of the gut when you're using something like proteinzyme, which has high quality vegan sourced amino acids, but also the micronutrients that the body needs as cofactors for those phase 1 and phase 2 detox enzymes. So this is an important thing, kind of like as a preparatory thing. You want to make sure the body has adequate energy before you do some sort of upregulated detox, in the same way you want to make sure that someone's regularly going to the bathroom, they're potentially sweating, and they're focusing on breathing properly to enable the excretion of these molecules to be as seamless as possible. And this is where the star of the show comes in. Now it's time to bring in sulfurazyme, which is a very, very powerful inducer of detox processes in the body, but it also has the ability to upregulate the body's endogenous, meaning internal antioxidant response and generation. So sulfurazyme is actually quite a simple thing in essence. It's broccoli sprout extract, but it is a very special form, which is a isothiocyanate, which I've just learned to pronounce yesterday because I practiced. And that is the compound that's released from the precursors that you find highly concentrated in cruciferous vegetables, specifically the sprouts of cruciferous vegetables. Many companies make what's called sulforaphane potential, or at least that's what I call it, because they use the precursor with an active enzyme and they trust that the process of the generation of sulforazyme, or sulforaphane rather, takes place inside the body. What we do is we use a pure standardized sulforaphane along with the myrosinase, which is the cofactor enzyme, and our astrozyme, which is an increase. The best way to look at astrozyme in the context of sulforaphane is it allows for the efficient use of sulforaphane because of the cofactors present in astrozyme to make sure that our body can maximally absorb and utilize and incorporate that sulforaphane directly into biochemical use. So that's what is unique and different about ours, simply because we use direct broccolophane extract rather than making sure that the process hopefully takes place down the line. Making sure that you're getting an adequate amount of sulforaphane is really what's needed when it comes to making sure that these biochemical processes take place. So as I mentioned before, just to recap clinically and efficaciously, sulforaphane is a natural inducer of the phase 2 detoxification process, one specific phase where you need a sulfur donating compound to activate that process. Many years ago, one of my mentors always told me, anytime you hear sulfur in biochemistry, think detox. And it is the sulfur-containing amino acids that are also essential in making sure that our phase 2 detoxification enzymes are working. So that's really where the component of sulforaphane lends itself to detox. In addition, because it's an upregulator of the body's natural NRF2 pathway, which we'll talk about, sulforaphane can help not only act as a direct antioxidant, but to stimulate the body's ability to endogenously produce its own antioxidants to help neutralize any free radicals that are generated during the detoxification process. And the wonderful thing about sulforaphane, as used when regularly supplemented, is it has a long-lasting effect after it's been taken for multiple days after a single dose. When you're doing some sort of detoxification plan for someone, it doesn't happen in a day, it doesn't happen in a week. It's a process that has to be pushed and then the body recovers. Then you do it again and the body recovers, so you don't stress the person's system out. That's why strategically using sulforaphane is kind of what I think is a key focal point of supporting the overall detox process, in addition to some other supplements strategically, is really going to be quite successful for when your clients are actually ready for this. Features and benefits of what make our sulforaphane different, as I've mentioned, is really about potency and purity. The higher quantity of sulforaphane you can get in the highest form of purity basically maximizes the physiologic effects in the body. And the other thing that is important is knowing the process by which it's manufactured, i.e., is it under some sort of chemical solvent, Or is it something that is solvent-free, making sure that you're not getting somewhat of a compromised or tainted end ingredient? We can always make the claim that ours is pure non-GMO. The sprouts are cultivated in a pesticide-free condition, and the final byproduct is always free of artificial preservatives, additives, and colors, and it's grown locally within the United States, which is always wonderful because we have certain laws and boundaries here that you can't necessarily enforce when you're getting international products under certain conditions. So clinically, why sulforaphane is interesting when we're talking about detoxification is how it's active in multiple places. So it in and of itself has a primary role of activating an epigenetic transcription factor, which is a very fancy way of saying within a cell, it has the ability to influence the nucleus of that cell to behave a certain way. And you can see that sulforaphane is the most powerful inducer of this, but there are other antioxidants and other aspects of lifestyle that can also stimulate this process. Resveratrol, lipoic acid, and quercetin, which we have a very powerful isoquercetin supplement. What basically happens is when you have these things signaling inside the cell, the NRF2 pathway, which is induced by sulforaphane, essentially gets bound and transported to the nucleus of the cell. Think of this as a programmed instruction to what the body wants the cell to do. Once it has been incorporated into the nucleus gets the message that the body is under some sort of stressful condition, and in order to preserve itself, it is to upregulate things like glutathione synthesis and various detoxification enzymes that help the body focus its energy and efforts into getting toxins out of the cell into the circulatory system so they can be sent to the liver and to the kidneys and hopefully removed under the detoxification process in those organs. So this is where sulforaphane comes in. It's not simply you take it and it upregulates your liver function. It's one thing it does, but on a system-wide effort, this is why I introduced the idea of systemic accumulation of toxins. If the cell is accumulating toxins, it sometimes gets stuck in what's called a healing crisis. This is where the cell danger response comes in. Using things like sulforaphane strategically helps to re-educate that cell to make sure that its energy and efforts are focused on getting the toxic material that it's accumulated out of the intracellular environment, restoring health to that cell before it starts to break down. In the liver aspect of things, this is where the cells have excreted their toxins. Now they've come back to the liver for phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Sulforaphane also has an activity or an action in upregulating the phase 2 detox activity, which when paired well with a proper comprehensive detoxification plan is what allows that start to finish detoxification process to be supported and that person to start to generate their way back to health overall. So when it comes to clinical uses of sulforaphane, these are the things that I think are most impactful and most strategic in terms of how to use it. Supporting the liver and the body's overall antioxidant capacity, and sulforaphane can also help with things like alcohol-induced liver stress, exercise-induced liver stress, and the development of non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome. Inflammatory response is a systemic thing, and we have to understand when the body raises inflammation, it's trying to heal itself. But when inflammation gets chronically triggered, the body gets stuck in a process to which you have to interrupt. This is where sulforaphane can help downregulate some of those pro-inflammatory cytokines, signaling the body to relax the inflammatory process. Fatty liver I just mentioned, but also toxin exposure, which can be a massive thing for people nowadays because the external environments we live in, unfortunately, are worse than ever. The food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe, not to mention we live inside most of the time. So when using sulforaphane, anytime you suspect or confirm long-term oxidative stress, when you suspect someone's in a chronic flare-up, chronic immune activation, the cell danger response is present. If you want to directly support the liver or initiate a simple or complex detox protocol, providing you've done your due diligence to make sure the channels are open and the body is ready for such a thing, this is a fantastic thing to use. To aid in the immune management under conditions of autoimmune presentations, Dr. Eric Belkovich, who is going to be coming back for an Ask Us Anything in September, He was the one who popularized the concept of using sulforaphane for things like Hashimoto's and thyroid issues. But that logic is not just limited to that organ. So if someone is under long-term autoimmune like stress, this could be one of the go-to things that you use, not in a detoxification context, but in a way to support the body's ability to manage the healing cycle. And for those who are extreme and avid exercisers, with the Olympics on, everyone glued to the TV, long-term endurance exercise can cause temporary stress on the liver, which you can see in elevated liver enzymes on a blood test. Believe it or not, sulforaphane is a great supplement for people who are overdoing it because the excessive amounts of metabolic stress of exercise can compromise metabolism through liver injury. And when taking sulforazyme, the vast majority of people will benefit from 1 to 2 capsules daily. You could potentially go up to 3, but you wouldn't want to keep someone on sulforazyme perpetually for the rest of their lives. You would likely want to cycle it in and out, and also use it strategically in higher doses when you want the systemic detox effect, potentially lower doses when you want to manage someone who's dealing with some sort of chronic immune stress. So as again, everyone, a lot of information. I really appreciate all the time and effort Master Supplements allows me to put into these presentations. I hope everyone learned a lot. Thank you for being here. And if you do want to ask any questions, we will take a few moments and do so. Now we'll take a sip of water. Thank you.
Just a couple of questions and probably better and certainly more up your alley.
So Kim asked, would you recommend taking sulforazyme even while fasting? That's an interesting question, Kim. The one caveat I would say is if you can tolerate it on an empty stomach, then I don't see the negatives. Fasting in and of itself will upregulate the detoxification process. So providing the body has adequate, micronutrient stores and there's enough energy there, you could probably get away with taking sulforazyme on an empty stomach. But I would say if one wanted to do fasting rather than a proper hardcore detox protocol, I would say fasting without the supplementation of sulforazyme, but maybe something more like a Therazyme or a Cerazyme would be my choice. And I would use sulforazyme more so under a fed state or with a more comprehensive detox process.
Roland, this one is probably one of the most frequently asked questions when it comes to types of sulforaphane versus the methyl sulfur, whatever the MSM. Don't have the whole term, but that's we get that question a lot, like a typical sulfur supplement that you take. I don't even know what pure encapsulations, those I don't want to say there's the dime a dozen, but there's a lot of companies selling MSM in that form, and it might be great for, I don't know, joint function or whatever they are using that for, but very different in the actual sulforaphane nutrient that's coming from the broccoli sprouts where we source it. Correct? I mean, you anything we want to elaborate on there, why we wouldn't include that?
Well, they function in different ways in terms of how they play their role in detox. So MSM, I believe, has the ability to donate methyl groups, so it can influence the methylation cycle within the body, to which methylation is a very widespread process in the body, which is inclusive of detoxification. And it does help donate the sulfur component. So in a pure detox context, it probably has the ability to work alongside sulforaphane to support phase 2 detoxification. But what MSM doesn't do is have a systems-wide influence over systemic antioxidant response in the body. So you have to understand, when you take a single ingredient nutrient, the body will use that nutrient where it actually needs it. And my favorite way of examining this is well, when you take magnesium, how do you know that magnesium is going to your nervous system? I was well, you don't really. The magnesium is going where the body needs magnesium. The limitations of an ingredient are where it can actually be useful within the context of metabolism. So sulforazyme, has the ability to support phase 2 detox like MSM does, but not in the same way. And sulforaphane has the NRF2 stimulating capacities at the cellular level where MSM does not. So again, they're both great products. They both have their intended uses that are both different, but in a comprehensive detox protocol, they might actually overlap and be useful together.
Yeah, and then Ken, that was a great first question because we get those types of questions a lot with the sulforaphane ingredient and other products. But the synergistic use, you have a follow-up question. So I think you nailed that one, Roland, just in that last part of that answer there.
There we go. I did that just by accident. So I hope that was satisfactory, Ken. Thank you. Let me see, can someone start on sulforazyme right away, or should they prep their body first, seeing as it's such a heavy hitter? Great question. I always have the bias to starting light with any supplement that you've never tried before, meaning you don't know how someone's going to respond, because we have to understand there's an old saying that says, in theory, theory and practice are the same thing. We can potentially describe what will happen in a plausible scenario. Then there's what happens when you take a supplement. So I think something like sulforazyme, because it is pure bromophane, it is very strong, it's very highly pure and potent, start slow. And if someone is a healthy human, they can exercise on a regular basis, they eat well, they don't seem to have any sort of signs and symptoms of chronic systemic toxicity, I think they can start this right away. Where someone may want to be careful is if their system is quite stressed, they have a known toxic burden, they have a very small tolerance to stress, you might want to do some support on the digestive side of things first, maybe get their gut in a better state. Again, systemic enzymes are wonderful because they're quite gentle in their support for the immune system. And then if all things are clear, this is a clinician's decision, then you make the call to start them on sulforaphane if you think that they're ready for that. Can touch how this works with the autism community. So autism is a very complex scenario, but one of the central hallmarks of autism is what's called central sensitization. There's a perpetual inflammation that is present within the nervous system, affecting central nervous system function and activity. A lot of people who are autistic have high quantities of some sort of toxic burden. If you run an organic acid test on them, some of their markers and like metabolic dysfunction are off the chain. So you know that they have issues with energy metabolism aerobically. So there's a lot of metabolic acid buildup. And they also have high quantities of neuroinflammation and gut inflammation. So if you can systemically help to attenuate some of those processes within the gut, within the brain, within the nervous system, with something like sulforazyme, then the degree of affliction that someone experiences under the conditions of autism might remediate themselves to some degree. What this may look like is the behavior will change. Their ability to communicate will be more fluid, as one would expect a normal conversation to be had. Their tantrums or their aggravations might downregulate or lessen because the tissue and the physiology is working more optimally when it's less inflamed. It is not the only thing for autism, but there's been amazing anecdotal and clinical success that a lot of our practitioners have reported to us. But again, it's also in conjunction with dietary changes, changing the microbiome, influencing the digestive process, and making sure that they're adequately nourished from a micronutrient perspective. Okay, can you use modified citrus pectin with sulforazyme, natozyme, and other products? I don't see why not. I would imagine that, something like sulforaphane, there are no herbal ingredients, to my knowledge, that would necessarily make it ineffective, compromised, or contraindicated. Because again, if modified citrus pectin has a specific target in the body that is different from that of sulforaphane, if you can rationalize the combination of those two for some sort of clinical outcome, I think absolutely. If someone is wanting to do a parasite cleanse, how would you incorporate sulforazyme into the protocol? Well, without knowing what they're suffering from, who they are, or anything about them, I will generalize and say the first thing when doing a parasite cleanse is understanding what you're trying to cleanse. It's parasites hopefully harboring themselves in the digestive system. So you're wanting to make sure that A, things are moving on a regular basis. B, you have been able to properly target and eradicate what may be infecting you. So I would say after the initial die-off or the initial start of the anti-parasitic protocol, bringing something like sulforazyme in to deal with the aftermath of the die-off, because we have to remember when you're doing any kind of anti-parasitic, antifungal, antimicrobial cleanse, you're going to create die-off reaction that pisses off the immune system that will potentially cause an increased burden to the liver, the circulatory system, the organs of detoxification. So after the initial insult of dealing with the parasites, I would either incorporate sulforazyme into the second phase or possibly introduce it after I've gotten a definitive initial Herxheimer response from the client. Last, what is an ideal on and off interval cycling for taking sulforazyme? Good old anonymous attendee. If it's the same person, I haven't heard from them in a while. I would say that something like sulforazyme would probably be cycled well at the low side, a month on, a month off, possibly up to 3 months continuously. But it wouldn't necessarily be high dose the whole time. It would have to be down to a few variables. This is how I would consider my duration of use. If I have introduced sulforaphane in a protocol and that protocol ran 2-3 months long, I did my baseline metrics to see where the person was, blood test, what have you. If after the fact I've seen improvements in their biomarkers specifically related to inflammation, 2-3 months follow-up, I would say that would be the longest I would use it. Conversely, if you're going based upon symptoms, if the person is starting to feel dramatically better and you've had them on the product for 1-2 months, that might be enough to go, okay, let's take a break, remove the signal that this ingredient provides, and then reintroduce if we need, or if not, we've done our job and the molecule has done what it's intended to do and upregulated the detox process. So that's how I would look at that. Possibly on the low side, 1 month. Oh, it's rough. On the high side, 2 or 3 months.
Oh, I think did you get the one from Diet? We had one. When was the best time to take sulfurazyme?
Oh, I don't think I touched on that one. I apologize.
And just, I guess that one, it certainly depends. I don't think we have a specific, some of the products are very specifically, other than if you want to comment on the away from food, it's, technically as a systemic enzyme. I'm not sure if it's as,
It's not even really an enzyme. It's a micronutrient. Sorry, it's an herbal derivative, right? So you can
right.
take. I would say with food would be better, just because some people may experience some irritation on an empty stomach. It's not pH or temperature sensitive, nor is it have the same considerations as something like a nattokinase or a lumbro. So for me, the best time to take sulforazyme is the time that you can remember to take it, practically. That being
Mhm.
said, if some people report morning because they want it, away from the evening where they may have some sort of post-consumption upset that compromises their sleep, that might be something worthwhile. Or the opposite might be true. Take it before bed, so when you're resting overnight, it can be incorporated into what you want it to do for your tissues. Breast cancer cases, max dosing for how long? Well, I can't answer that one, because I'm not an endocrine specialist or cancer specialist, and there's too many variables within that condition for me to clinically give my input or feedback.
What about negative? We talked a little bit about just detoxing too fast with this product. I mean, and here and in the corporate offices, we don't hear adverse reactions really for any of our products. Certainly probiotics and enzymes, this one included. I know we did talk about the concern of just I think having the gut health in place before any detox is just smart. Any other adverse reactions or anything? Things to avoid, concomitant uses with other things.
Well, when someone's detoxing, they have to understand, I think, the big picture concept of what you're asking your body to do. So you're asking your body to break things down to go into a catabolic state. Catabolic is breakdown. So when we're detoxifying, the energy in our physiology is being biased and directed towards the removal of things in the system and making sure that you're detoxifying and excreting compounds from your body. So what you don't want to do is stress the body in any way that upsets the balance of that. One, making sure that you're eating a certain way. A detoxification diet is not having a ribeye steak every night with, potatoes and lots of growth-based foods. So making sure that you're reducing the potential meat consumption, increasing the use of fresh produce, drinking more water, avoiding things like caffeine and alcohol, because that's the signal that you want to support. The other thing would be not exercising too intensely, not engaging in highly stressful and physically vigorous or mentally vigorous activities, because you do not want your energy dedicated to anything but making sure that your body is able to properly support the removal of things that are stored in tissues. So you want to down regulate your life so your body is able to direct all hands on deck to the task at hand. That's why I like that someone asked about fasting. Fasting is a breakdown enhanced way of living. But when people fast and they go to the gym and they have 3 coffees a day and they do a full day at work, you're actually pissing off your nervous system, because you're requiring a lot of stress hormones and cortisol and various other things that are going to take away the body's ability to focus the energy and efforts on the detox process. All traditional cultures or for religious purposes, when someone fasts, they also rest. They sleep more, they do less. But because we live in a Western society, we don't necessarily have that option. So it's the best of your ability. If you're a weightlifter or a CrossFit person under detox, you should probably be going for walks instead of going to the gym and trying to do box jumps. If you are still working, make sure that you're prioritizing highly nutritious foods that are not super hard to digest and break down, so you can give your body what it needs to support the detoxification protocol that the supplements are providing. So the lifestyle, sleep, that thing that we don't do. So it's really about understanding the 30,000-foot view is the space by which all these things are taking place, and the microscope view is the nutrients you're taking, the specific supplements you're taking, and the actions that you're wanting to push in the body by taking those ingredients.
I know it wasn't, but I felt like some of that was closed circuit to me because I'll like do the intermittent fast all day and the coffee at work. That was some of that was really hitting home. Thank you. Great answer. We can't unfortunately share. We have some of our most amazing testimonials. So I'll just say that with the product sulfurizyme, and I don't want to get into the specifics of them, but it's certainly one of the products that we've heard some of the most dramatic, anecdotal testimonials from practitioners working with, their patients. So it's, like with all of our products, we expect results, whether they're the digestive products where it can be very fast, if you're irregular for whatever reason, if you're uncomfortable digestively, the enzymes work amazingly fast, the probiotics, but, products like this one, it's amazing to me how people will feel, one of the systemic enzymes they'll take it and say they feel it after a little bit. But to me, some of those are better suited like with biomarkers and a clinician who's there to like walk you through some of the, test results that you might have or getting tested before. And then after, taking a couple capsules, a day. Sorry, I think Misty, you had in there, you said it was always one capsule. I just did want to point out that a serving size, because we're delivering a large amount of sulforaphane comparatively to some other brands, but we're giving that in 2 capsules. So we actually have a 2-capsule serving size. But for a kid, and we talked a lot about autism, we're going to be at MedMaps coming up here in the fall. This is a popular product. We featured it last March because we were in the spring MedMaps. You can certainly take just 1 capsule, but just that you're getting half of what's in the supplement facts section, if you're doing that. But totally fine to do.
Yeah, well
Anything we
said.
want to
Oh, it's because I was going to say that with these things, there's always a little bit of a delay in terms of like the big response. But if someone is going through an aggressive detox, we do have to remember that sometimes things that feel worse are good signs of what's happening. Then you feel better after the body starts to relieve itself. So, I would say that no contraindications, but if you are wanting to detoxify something, you might not feel great for the first week as you start to upregulate the process, but as the body starts to remove accumulated compounds from its tissues, energy always goes up, mood always lifts up, sleep gets better, mental function, physical performance, they always get better. So I would say that's good. And then maybe, we can share with everyone that on the 22nd of August, we're going to do a clinical Ask Us Anything. So if people do have clinical questions, that's a time to jump on. It's going to be what, 11:30 Central, I believe.
Yeah, and it's essentially a long version of this. It's
Yes.
it's
So
an
people are
open.
interested, and I can't give uh, hard and fast absolutes with certain things, but I'm happy to talk through these things with people in a way that's conversational because it helps everyone else learn when you ask the question. So that's coming up on August 22nd. And then September 4th, we're going to do our next webinar regarding nattokinase, focusing in on that with some exciting stuff coming down the pipeline as well attached to that. So please do
Mhm.
look for those. Please look for those webinars. The word I'm looking for is promotions. There we go.
Yeah, thanks, Raphael. The we actually do have sulfurazyme as a product promotion on this month, so it's 15% off. So if anyone who's listening to this and haven't tried it yet, you get that 15%, and it's not a cheap product to make. So it's nice to get that savings off to at least try it. And then yeah, Raphael, it's actually two different events. We have Dr. Belkovich coming for a master class, which will really be like a one-on-one Q&A. Roland going back and forth and picking his brain later in September. The exact date is
Around
TBD.
the third week of September, we're targeting
Yep.
right now. We just have to get confirmation on that.
Yeah, so that'll be coming. The Ask Us Anything is the 22nd of this month, and yeah, now that this one's done, anyone who follows us on social media and in the email contacts will be pushing that one for the 22nd, and that's just an open roundtable discussion. We get questions every day from doctors. They often lead into dialogue, so this is just to lean into that, and with Roland's expertise, just to be there live and kind of supporting that back and forth discussion and
Not
dialogue.
limited to sulfurazyme. All products, all
Exactly.
scenarios, all conditions, to the best of my ability, I will help to provide insight and guidance if people are looking for that, or just foster great conversation.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for joining and attending, and thank you, Roland, as always.
Welcome. Lunch and learns. Woohoo! Hope
All
everyone's fed
right.
and ready to go back to work.
Yes, definitely. Back to work.
All right. See you
Thanks.
guys. Thank you, everyone.